Hello, everybody, and welcome to, Drach Book Reviews episode 002. It's been a little while since we did episode 001, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not too long, and I have been obviously reading many books, but I thought we're going to do the same format as we did last time with a few minor changes. So again, let me know what you think of the format in the comments below, little bits that I can improve, etc. So today we're going to follow the same premise as before. We're going to look at two brand new books recently published, and then an older book, although in this case there is a little bit of a special circumstance because that older book is coming back into print, which is quite nice. So our first subject for today is this book. This is obviously The Africa Ship, moving my hand there, by Dominic Etzold. Now, some of you may already know Mr. Etzold from the works that he's done on U-boat warfare in the North Atlantic. But while admittedly this is, as you might guess, a Zeppelin, an airship, and therefore it flies, it's not a water-based vessel, it is still incredibly interesting because, one, a lot of the Zeppelins were actually under command of the German Navy, and two, well, it's big, so it's still a ship. Now, this is obviously talking primarily about the attempt to get as German Zeppelin to German East Africa. German East Africa in that situation not being one of the most written about sections of World War I. However, I would like to draw your attention to a few features I find really, really nice. So I'm just going to open it up here. Now, one of the things which you'll probably know from my own videos and my own book so far, HMS Belfast, is I really like bringing the accounts of people who are actually there to the fore. So if I just open on a random page, this is page 78 in case anyone's interested, you can see there is a whole ton of direct quotes from various people. Where do I think there is? So this book is littered with direct quotes from reports and evidence and recounts given by the people who are actually there. So not only is it telling you the story of what happened and where the ship went and what various incidents they had, but it's also telling you about the people, what they thought, what they experienced, and also, those little details that personal recounts can bring about that an overall history might not. Now, broadly speaking, it is, apart from a couple of tables and a handful of maps, a textbook, as in literally it just has text, but there is a rather nice insert section in the middle which has different paper and a bunch of photos in it, which is useful if you want a reference as to what these airships look like and some of the exploits that they got up to. And it provides a very useful prologue in that it talks about the exploits of some of the crew and the German airships before the main mission. So you get an idea of what you're dealing with before they head off on this attempted voyage to Africa. Now, one of the other things which I find exceptionally good is, I'm just going to split the book there. So this section is the main text of the book, and this section is all the appendixes, sources, and bibliographies. So there's a good chunk of that, which I really appreciate. Now, in the actual book itself, again, hopefully I'll be putting a better version of this on screen for you. You can hopefully see, for example, there, you see there's a little number, which in this case is a number 8. And this is all the footnotes for the sourcing. So then we go past the appendixes where there's a bunch of rather useful maps, there's ballast charts, there's the various people involved, the flights of the airship involved, and so forth. But you then get to the end notes, which is ahead of the bibliography. And in the end notes, just open up here again, you can see there's, in some cases, a little bit of further information about whatever has been talked about in the paragraph, but also, as relevant, all the various sources. And it's not just the source of where the information has come from. So, for example, this one, which just here, that's Leto Vorbeck's actual biography or autobiography, but it also includes the page number. So if you get a copy of Leto Vorbeck's biography, if you want to have a further look into his experience directly, you don't have to go searching through the entire thing to find out which particular element in the book is supported by that. You just go, page 180, I'll go there then. And that's most of that latter section of the book is this endnote section, and then there is an extensive bibliography as well, which is a nice feature. So again, you can chase down all the various sources that have been used, but I really like that format, and it's a very entertaining and interesting read as well. So yeah, The Africa Ship by Dominic Etzold, very definitely a recommend, and video on that coming at some point in the future, because yes, I do cover airships. I just haven't to a great extent so far, but I do want to. Now, second book from the relatively new books is this one, The First World War in the Baltic Sea, Volume 1. As you can see, up to February 1915, so not a huge amount of time covered, just the second half of 1914. And this one's by Mark Harris. Now, I must say, first off, I'm really looking forward to Volume 2, based on Volume 1. And this follows a slightly different format to the previous book. So it opens, quite helpfully, with maps of the Baltic, which can be quite useful for people who are perhaps not so familiar with that area of operations. It starts off with an overview of the various naval policies of the people who'd actually be involved in the Baltic side of World War One, which is quite useful, because you get to know, what were the ideas of these various navies, how were they trying to execute them, what equipment and ships did they have, and also bases and defences, because this is a very narrow sea. Now, this has photos and maps throughout, unlike the Africa Ship, which concentrates them into appendixes in a central section. It's a publishing choice. Either way works, to be perfectly honest. And in this case, as with the Africa Ship, the reproduction of the pictures and maps is very high quality. There are still my favourite quotes from people, as you can see here, quotes from actual people. And this actually follows a slightly different format for the endnotes. So whereas the Africa Ship has the endnotes at the back and you just go back and forth with the numbers, this has a slightly different version. This is if you've ever read any of the books by D.K. Brown, where he has marginal notes instead of endnotes, this follows a similar thing, but except it's kind of a hybrid between footnote and endnote. So, for example, here you can see we've got this section. So there's a number there, and then directly beneath you've got the quotation of the sources, etc., etc. And there's multiple sources cited. And one of the interesting things that's, I think, really important to say about this book is that not only is the Baltic in World War One a subject that's not particularly heavily covered, but also when you look at this, there's not just English sources, there's lots of German sources, unsurprisingly listed, but there's also a lot of Russian language sources, who of course the other side mostly in the Baltic campaign. Given the amount of Cyrillic that's in here, there's been a lot of Russian sources consulted, which is very good, because obviously it means that both sides are being equally represented. Also got some really, really nice photos. Some of them I haven't seen before. So there's a battle line of the Russian pre-dreadnoughts, which looks pretty cool, and you can see various maps and formation layouts, etc. Now, as you might expect, it is very dense in detail, because it's not even covering quite a full year. There's the background element, and then 6 to 8 months of the war, depending on if you classify it by when the war actually breaks out, or you classify it by when actual active naval operations are going on. But there is a huge amount of detail involved, and that's really good, because that means that virtually no operation in the Baltic is left uncovered, which is very handy, because, again, perhaps with history of the North Sea, for example, you could reasonably expect an interested reader to know about some of the engagements, so you could mention them in passing, and people are like, oh yeah, I know what happened there. Not so much for this area, and so covering almost everything that happens is a really good idea, and very well executed. Again, very, very readable, at least for the naval history enthusiast. Now, again, there is a appendix section, which I'm just heading towards. Right, so you've got, in the appendixes, you've got the organisation of the Baltic Fleet, which is quite handy to know. Who's in, not just the various ships, but also who's in charge of the various ships in their various formations. more charts of warships, so tonnage, armament, etc., for both sides, the German and the Russian. Then you've got a bibliography, lots of archival sources. Again, a bunch of English, a bunch of German, a bunch of Cyrillic. So someone's been doing a lot of research, although not that I can understand the Cyrillic, but there you go. And also another feature I like of good reference works, a really, really good index. So an awful lot of specific things that you might be looking for in this conflict, all nicely itemized. So if you want to, for example, look at the cruiser raid on the Gulf of Bothnia, tells you where that is generally, but then it also goes through specific elements of that raid. So spies, submarine reports, reinforcements, support fleets, use of seaplanes. So if you know that there's an operation, you can look in the index, okay, and then you can look under that operation. Oh, this is all the individual parts. So if you've heard about, oh, well, at this operation on this date, someone did this, it's very easy to find the reference for it in this book, which is very, very handy. And as I said, I look forward to Volume 2 and beyond. And then we come on to our final entry, which is a book that has been out in publication for a while. This monstrous thing, Cruisers and Naval Legends, and you may recognize this from a few years ago when it came out, published by World of Warships. Now, quick declaration of minor interest. I did actually get asked to do some of the sense checking, sort of spelling, punctuation, grammar, etc., for the English edition back when it came out a while ago. Now, unlike the other two, which are obviously very focused on specific instances, obviously the Africa ship, the voyage of that Zeppelin, and the few months of the Baltic War, this book is a more general book. So some people call it a coffee table book, a intro book, general, introduction to things. So you start off, this thing is so ridiculously heavy. You start off with looking at ancient ships, Roman and Greek. You go through the Age of Sail, which is always fun. Dutch there. And then you get into kind of the main period of cruiser warfare, and it looks at all sorts of things. So if we're looking at, say, the armoured and protected cruiser section, looks at the various different developments that are on hand, and of course, being World of Warships, they've got access to all their models, so they can do all sorts of fancy, fun graphics like this. This is the Aurora, and as we keep on going, there's little sections on various battles. This one is, of course, the Battle of Jutland, me trying to hide behind the whole thing. And it goes, obviously, the bulk of this is looking at World War I, World War II. Oh yeah, you've got these little fold outs. So one of the reasons for the bulk of things is you get these little fancy little fold out bits, which tell you, in this case, a bit about the Project 83 proposed Russian cruiser. Right. Turns out this is not how you're supposed to read a book. We've got Battle of the Java Sea there, Tournai. There's a couple of really nice fold-out graphics, so kind of halfway between a plan and a full graphic. Again, this is not how you're supposed to manipulate the book. Come this way, you think. There we go. And so it goes on. It's got little intro bits on specific weapon systems. So if you've wanted to know where everybody in a 5-inch 38 turret goes, they've got that. And it goes on, obviously, into the Cold War era, because cruisers were still a thing back then, in the Cold War period. And then you've got a glossary. So there's various terms that are used. For example, what is an oscilloscope? There's an entry in the glossary for that. And this copy came with this thing in the back. And funnily enough, talking about the 5-inch 38, it's a really big poster on the 5-inch 38. The graphic is also in the book, but that's a fun little thing you can also have. So this book, as I said, it came out. There was a campaign, you could order it, etc. And then it's kind of been out of print unless you got a second-hand copy later on eBay or something. But it is coming back into print now. So there's another campaign for it. Obviously, various rewards going on, similar to the last time. So if you didn't get a chance to pick it up before and you want to kind of broad sweep of the history of cruisers, their systems, where they were used, etc., etc., then go and try and pick it up. And if you want to do that, then there is a link in the video description below, and so follow that link and it'll take you to the campaign. Also, if you mention somewhere relevant in that link, or if you choose to back it that Drach sent you, then there is a little bit of extra reward going in there for you from me, which will also be a little bit of a spoiler alert for things that are potentially happening hopefully later this year. So that's my 3 books for book review 002. If you have, or if you know of new books coming up, then for book review 003, then let me know. Obviously, I'm going to be choosing pre-existing books for the pre-existing book slot, but there are 2 slots for new upcoming books. There are a few that I have shortlisted for potentially for book review 003, but of course 004, 005, 006, and if there's a particularly nice one, I can obviously bump a book from 003 onwards. So yeah, more book reviews coming on probably an ad hoc basis, as and when I, 1, read a bunch of new books, and 2, remember that this is actually a format that I do occasionally. Other than that, thank you very much for listening once more, and see you again in another video.